Welcome to PatsCast. Cutdown day is over with. Apologies if the audio and video are not great. I'm in a hotel room right now, but the Patriots now have their initial 53-man roster. Gonna break down all of the players who made it, all of the ones who were cut, and the players who could potentially still be cut with the waiver wire taking place almost immediately. Gonna be interesting to see what this final 53-man roster looks like, but we have a pretty good idea after today, and the biggest news is the Patriots are carrying 8 wide receivers, and for all practical purposes, they're basically carrying 9. We talked about, are they going to have 6? Are they going to have as many as 7? No. They really didn't make any hard decisions at wide receiver. It started with Jalen Polk, placing him on the season-ending IR, so that made it easy. You didn't have to cut Polk, but then they kept the other 8 guys that we all talked about. Of course, Stephon Diggs is going to make it. Pop Douglas, Kyle Williams, the early draft pick. He's out there practicing this week. But it really came down to guys like Efton Chisholm, who we know had a spectacular training camp, a great preseason. Kendrick Bourne, who's been injured pretty much most of training camp, and really was practicing with the twos when he was out there. And Javon Baker, who hasn't contributed much on offense, but has done a ton on special teams. All 3 of those guys have made the active roster. I don't think there was any doubt about Efton Chisholm with his preseason performance. The guy catches everything thrown his way. Looks like your next Julian Edelman, Wes Welker type player in that Josh McDaniels offense. So I don't think that that's much of a surprise. But Kendrick Bourne, I was surprised not to see him at least on the IR, designated to return. But he really hasn't been out there for many, many weeks now, and I thought he would perhaps just be cut or placed on the IR if they want to keep him or potentially trade him. Nope, he's on the 53-man roster, so maybe that's encouraging. We might actually see Kendrick Bourne out there. And then, of course, Javon Baker made the team, and it was a little surprising because we had news that he basically unfollowed the Patriots on his Instagram account, deactivated much of his social media, but then he was announced that he's on the team. So that's an interesting situation to follow. He's likely a special teams player only unless they really get injured down the depth chart at wide receiver. But you got 7 guys in front of him potentially right now, assuming all those guys are there week 1. I'm happy for Javon Baker. I mean, he carved himself a role on this team. We'll see if it sticks, but an excellent gunner, excellent on kickoff returns. He could turn into a very good special teamer that can eventually work his way into that wide receiver role. But if it weren't for special teams, he would not be on this roster right now. So kudos there to Javon Baker. For the offensive line, Garrett Bradbury, I think many of us were hoping he would be cut after his poor preseason performance and hasn't really done much in training camp. I really will be disappointed if he is starting out there week 1, but of course he's going to be on the roster. You sign him as a veteran. Ben Brown, who's in the running for that starting center position, he made the roster, of course. Marcus Bryant looks to be your backup swing tackle at either position. Will Campbell, the rookie, of course he's going to make the team. Vidarian Lowe still found a spot on this roster, which I'm glad. I think we harp on Vidarian Lowe over the years, but he's not an NFL starter, but I think he is a solid NFL backup, and he was better than expected last season. Still not very good, but as a backup at the tackle position, particularly if he's behind Marcus Bryant, you feel good having him as a depth piece, and Marcus Bryant is probably going to be out there if either Will Campbell or Morgan Moses goes down, so really it's going to take 2 of those guys to go down, perhaps, to see Vidarian Lowe. Morgan Moses, of course, on the roster, Mike Owenu, Jared Wilson, the rookie, looked like he might be starting at center or left guard. We don't really know. I think he'll probably start at left guard at this point. They aren't giving him a ton of reps at center, but of course he made the team. And perhaps the biggest surprise, Caden Wallace. Drafted him last year with Elliott Wolf and Gerard Mayo's team, and real disappointment. They expected him to move from right tackle to left tackle as a rookie, barely saw the field, had some injury issues, couldn't play either positions. Now they're trying him out at guard, and they clearly believe in him at the guard position if he was to make the roster. I think most people had him potentially being cut, so good for Caden Wallace. They do need depth at that guard position. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to look elsewhere in terms of waiver wires and in terms of bringing in a potential starter, especially at that left guard spot where there does seem to be a big hole, although I am encouraged by Jared Wilson. But Caden Wallace has a spot on this roster, at least as of right now. As for the defensive players that made it, first off, Jelani Tavai, we knew he was kind of on the chopping block potentially, is dealing with some injury issues, so he was placed on IR, but designated to return, unlike Jalen Polk, who will miss the entire season. It's possible that he's a trade chip and you keep him on IR, but that also doesn't help his value either. I think most Pats fans were disappointed in Tavai last year. It was going to be interesting to see how he fit with this new Mike Vrabel, Terrell Williams defense, but look, he wasn't cut. He's on IR, designated to return. We could see him after, week 4 or week 6? I think it's after week 4. So we could see Jelani Tavai back out there, but it's questionable whether or not he would actually make this team. And he's not on the 53, he's on IR, but there will be injuries between now and when he returns, so we could see him. Some other guys, Anthony Jennings, not much of a surprise. He is an NFL quality starter. He's just not a great scheme fit with this 3-4 defense that they now run with Terrell Williams as the defensive coordinator. But he lit it up whenever he was out there with the backups in the preseason. Everyone knows he is an NFL starter caliber player, potential trade block guy, but you're not going to keep him off the roster. And same thing kind of happened with Kyle Duggar. He was slow and disappointing throughout all of training camp. The 2 preseason games, playing out there with the 2s and 3s, played most of the preseason finale, but he played very well, very explosive. He looked like the old Kyle Duggar in those games. And it sounds like the Patriots, they tried to trade him, but he has too much talent to cut, and he's too costly to let go. You have a huge cap hit letting Kyle Duggar go. Not as much of a cap hit if you let him go after next year, so maybe they'll keep him around for a year and see what happens. According to Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, they had offers, but that would have required the Patriots to absorb a ton of his money, and once you factor that in, it's better to just keep him, have a depth piece. Maybe he'll get some playing time, right? I mean, Kyle Duggar is still a very talented NFL quality player. He is an older player for a guy that hasn't been in the league too long, but similar to Anthony Jennings, you're not going to cut the guy, especially with what he's being paid. He's the second highest paid player on the team. There's a spot for him on the roster, but teams will probably keep calling, and maybe the Patriots will make a deal, but as of right now, he's on this 53-man roster. Marte Mapu, former safety, switched to linebacker. We know Vrabel likes speedy linebackers. That's why he put Marte Mapu at the linebacker position. Obviously needs to gain some weight to play that position, but he was kind of on the bubble there. But clearly Mike Vrabel likes the adjustments that he's made, and if he's continuing to improve at the linebacker position, then he will get some playing time out there because there's a ton of upside for a safety that can fly around the field, and that's going to be a little bit different with this Mike Vrabel defense. Is he really emphasizes speed over size and power? Perhaps that's why Keon White finds himself lower and lower on the depth chart, because all he has is power moves. Mike Vrabel working with him on expanding his toolbox a little bit, but Keon White finds himself lower on the depth chart, may not be out there in the starting lineup, even though we all expected him to be in week 1. So they're emphasizing speed, and that's why Marte Mapu, switching positions from safety to linebacker, has a spot on this roster. Frankly, I'm kind of surprised they aren't taking a similar approach with Kyle Duggar. I think Kyle Duggar in a lot of ways looks like a speedy linebacker, the type of player that teams put out there, modern NFL defenses put out there. But as of right now, look, Kyle Duggar looked great. He looked like a strong safety in the preseason finale. But if you're not going to play him much, I would at least be interested in trying him out at linebacker, like they're doing with Marte Mapu. But both guys are on the roster. I think perhaps the biggest surprise, Del Pettis, the safety. We know there's a ton of depth at those DP positions. He made the roster and really came into his own after being an undrafted free agent last year. Slowly worked himself into the lineup, got some more playing time in the end of the season with Gerard Mayo, and he's been explosive in the preseason. He's been very effective in training camp. Looks like Mike Vrabel loves the guy. Loved the story. Del Pettis didn't look like he had a spot in the NFL. Came in undrafted, and now he finds himself on a much more talented roster, perhaps one of the more talented defenses in the league, particularly at the DB spots, and he's on the 53. So good for Del Pettis making the team. I think less of a surprise. It would have been a surprise, 2 months ago, but Elijah Ponder, undrafted free agent pickup out of Cal Poly. Mike Vrabel loves this guy, and he really stood out throughout training camp. I don't think it's a surprise, but he's leapfrogged a lot of good players on that roster, and I'm not saying Elijah Ponder is going to be a starter, but eventually I could see him being in that starting lineup, particularly if there are injuries heading into year 2, year 3 of his career. I think there's a lot of upside with this player, and that's why he leapfrogged a lot of guys that we expected to make the team. So that starts with Braden Swinson. Braden Swinson was a 5th-round draft pick. Many thought he was more appropriately a 3rd or 4th-round pick. Coming out of LSU, Will Campbell's teammate actually got the best of Will Campbell, perhaps because he knew his moves. But in training camp, particularly in one-on-ones, he didn't make the roster. And, that was one of the more exciting draft picks, Swinson. I think he could be a practice squad candidate, but I would be surprised if a team didn't snatch him. But, look, there was a reason he slipped to the 5th round, and there's a reason he didn't make the 53-man roster as of this point in time. So, Braden Swinson didn't make it. Same thing with Marcus Epps. He was a free agent signing coming from Las Vegas. Seemed like a really good Mike Vrabel fit. Mike Vrabel obviously wanted him here, but was terrible all season. Eventually got buried on the depth chart and just got torched in that preseason finale going against 3s and 4s from the New York Giants playing late in the game. He asked to be released. The team obliged, but I think it would have happened anyway. So Marcus Epps looked to be like one of those promising free agent signings, and he didn't even make the 53, which is a bit disappointing, but he will get an opportunity somewhere else, I'm sure of it. And then Kobe Minor, the cornerback, Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in this year's NFL draft. Him and Swinson, as far as I can tell, are the only 2 players from this year's draft that didn't make the team. So that's a good sign that they finally turned this around with Mike Vrabel having the final say in having Elliott Wolf a little bit more in the background, running the scouting teams, etc. But Kobe Minor, he flashed at times, but there's just too much depth at that cornerback position. So not too much of a surprise that he didn't make the team. Now back to the offensive side for the players that didn't make it. DeMontre Jacobs, not really a surprise. It was kind of hilarious that there was a report last week saying, hey, the Patriots are willing to trade Vidarian Lowe and DeMontre Jacobs. Nobody wants those guys, particularly Jacobs. They picked him up on waiver wires last year because he was cut by another team and then ended up finding himself in the starting lineup quite often with all the injuries that happened to that offensive line. But that's a testament to just how much they've improved the line. I mean, the line is still going to have issues, for sure, but DeMontre Jacobs, not much of a surprise that he was cut, and especially when you have Marcus Bryant and you're keeping Vidarian Lowe. And Vidarian Lowe's been playing at right tackle, too, so both of those guys can kind of act as swing tackles, which doesn't leave much of a spot for DeMontre Jacobs. And then Cole Strange made a valiant effort. We know he's had some injury issues, but ultimately didn't make the team. This may actually go down as Bill Belichick's worst draft pick. First rounder, middle first round draft pick, coming from UT Chattanooga. We saw the clip with Sean McVay mocking him, thinking they could get him in the 3rd round. They spent all this time scouting him, ended up taking him in the 1st round. Kind of looked okay as a rookie, but not, first round caliber player. Then the injuries, tried to work his way back, tried to fit him in at center a little bit. Ultimately didn't work out. So the last year of his rookie contract, he's ultimately cut by Mike Vrabel's Patriots. And, this is a new regime. A lot of these guys we expected to be on the team, and they didn't, and Cole Strange is one of them. But, a little disappointing. I was expecting him to be your starter 2 months ago at the left guard spot, but he isn't as good as he was as a rookie, and we expected him to improve on that. He got injured, and the rest is history. So that's it for Cole Strange's career in New England, unfortunately. And then the interesting story, Andy Borregales beat out Parker Romo. Now, Parker Romo was the better kicker. In the preseason, he was the better kicker throughout training camp, but they spent a 6th-round draft pick on Andy, and he was the first kicker taken in the draft, considered the best kicker in the draft, had a really bad miss on a long field goal in the preseason finale, and I thought that was it. I thought Parker Romo had the job, but ultimately, it's Borregales. They're going to take the draft pick. They're going to take the guy with high upside. And, maybe Parker Romo will find a spot somewhere else. I don't see, this never really happens, teams cut a kicker and then put him on the practice squad if there's a real competition. I don't see that happening. You're not going to waste a practice squad slot on a kicker. But, look, if Borregales is a disaster, which he might be, he was the worst kicker this preseason, you could cut him and bring back Parker Romo if he doesn't have a spot on another NFL team. So you kind of always have that option, and, I hope it works out. But the kicker spot could be one of the bigger red flags that we're not talking about enough heading into the regular season. So hopefully Borregales gets it together, has the leg, had the accuracy in college, but played in South Florida. How's he going to do in November and December in Foxborough? We're going to have to see, but in good August weather, he's kind of been a disaster so far. So hopefully it works out with Borregales. And if it doesn't, hopefully you can find someone else, or Parker Romo is still available. I'm a little disappointed. I thought Parker Romo should win that job, but I see why they did it. It's ultimately Andy Borregales. He probably had the job the day he was drafted. So the interesting thing, there's only 3 players from the 2024 NFL draft that made this 53-man roster. Obviously, Drake May was a shoo-in. And then it's Caden Wallace and Javon Baker. You could have easily had one. Talking about both those guys. Are they going to make the team? Are they not? I'm kind of surprised both of them made it. I thought it might just be Drake May. But, look, it's Mike Vrabel's show right now. Keeping pretty much everyone they drafted this year. Hopefully that's a sign that they actually brought in some talent, because dating back the last 5 years, Patriots have had terrible drafts. A lot of that had to do with Belichick, and sadly, a lot of that had to do with Elliott Wolf, who's still around. And Elliott Wolf was in control of last year's draft, and, got lucky with the quarterback. They just picked the guy who fell to him, Drake May. Caden Wallace didn't really work out. Now they're trying him out at guard. Javon Baker is only working out because he's on special teams. Hasn't gone great for Elliott Wolf. I mean, I guess Jalen Polk is still around on IR, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how those dynamics play out with Vrabel and Wolf, and if Wolf is indeed back next year, with Ryan Cowden being Vrabel's right-hand man in the front office, and of course, John Stretch Stryker, who can do everything now. Those guys seem to be ahead on the pecking order of Elliott Wolf. So maybe they're happy with Elliott Wolf just doing scouting stuff, but the scouting hasn't been good while he's been here. But time to turn things around, hopefully. When all's said and done, this won't be your Week 1 53-man roster. We have waivers coming up. I think there are some players potentially still on the chopping block. That starts with Javon Baker. There's a reason he did this stuff on social media, right? Like, I don't think he would do that and then make the team. Perhaps Vrabel told him, look, we're going to put you on the 53, but we're eyeing this player or these players in waivers, and unfortunately, you're the first to go if we bring someone in. That's just speculation. I don't know, but, Javon Baker's safe as of right now, but in a few hours, that could change very quickly. Same with Caden Wallace. Again, I think they think he has some potential at the guard position, but plenty of other players on that offensive line, plenty of other players ahead of him, so he could still be cut. And same with Marte Mapu, just making that transition to linebacker. I think they're happy with him, but those 3 seem to be in the very bottom of the roster and players that you might have to waive if you get someone better via waivers. And of course, you could still trade Anthony Jennings. You could still trade Kyle Duggar. You could still trade Kendrick Bourne if he comes back and he's healthy. There's a lot the Patriots are going to do between now and mid-September when they open up at home against the Las Vegas Raiders. But that's it for this episode of PatsCast. Again, apologies if the audio is not great, but let me know in the comments. Are you happy? Are you disappointed that certain guys didn't make the team? Who do you think is going to be cut? Do you have anyone in mind on waiver wires that the Patriots could potentially pick up? And who gets cut after that? Curious to hear from you. If you're watching on YouTube and you like this video, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, or subscribe if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Here in New York, on business for a couple days, but we'll be back very soon with more New England Patriots coverage.